Hmm.
All right, and we are good. Well, welcome to the Q&A portion for our two polls program. My name is Jake Isgar. I'm here with SF Indie Fest, and I appreciate you watching the shorts and for giving some more of your time to watch this Q&A with some of our filmmakers. So before we start, we'll have folks that are here with us introduce themselves and the films they worked on. Why don't we start with the Arctic Summer crew?
Sure. Hi guys, I'm Kyle. Uh, Directed and shot and edited Arctic Summer with Daniel here.
Hey
And
guys.
I'm currently based in New York.
I'm Daniel, co-directed and shot Arctic Summer with Kyle. I'm based in Los Angeles. We filmed this when we were still undergrads at the University of Pennsylvania 2 years ago. We were in Tuktoyaktuk for a month filming, and then it took a while to figure out how we were going to edit this together into something, which became Arctic Summer. So yeah, super happy to be screening at this festival.
Awesome. And then Into the Dark.
Hi, folks. My name is Mike Snyder, and I'm the director and co-producer of Into the Dark. I'm based in Charlottesville, Virginia, just now, and this film was shot on a 3-week expedition into the Arctic regions during the polar night, which is the time of year when the sun does not rise, hence the name.
Awesome. And then with you, Martin.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Maarten van Rouverroy. I'm in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. I'm a marine biologist and a cameraman specializing in wildlife, the environment and science. And I represent a film from the other pole, Antarctica, Disappearing Penguins. And we actually shot in full daylight all the time because we were there in Antarctic summer also on a scientific expedition, which lasted 6 weeks. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. So I guess we'll snake it around. We'll start with you, Martin. I just wanted to ask, how did the project come about? What was the genesis of Disappearing Penguins?
Yeah, so I made this film on assignment for Greenpeace. I was joining a ship called the Esperanza. We actually had 2 research vessels down in Antarctic at the same time, the Esperanza and the Arctic Sunrise. And we had a team of scientists from Stony Brook University who were researching the penguin population on this island called Elephant Island, which is also quite famous in maritime history because it's here that Shackleton and his men stranded in the 1916, I believe. In fact, I tried to work that into the film, but we couldn't get the budget together to get the Getty images. There's actually some photographs that have been saved from that expedition, and it's interesting because penguin colonies, they remain in place for centuries, and so Shackleton and his men, they actually would have fed of the same penguin colonies that our researchers were counting. And as you will see in the film, the actual research was pretty, well, I wouldn't say simplistic, but it was pretty straightforward. So they would go to these areas where they knew there were penguin colonies, and the last count was in the 1970s, and they basically just went in and counted by hand. And as you will see in the film, that's quite a Herculean task. Counted these penguins and then compared those numbers to the 1970s, and yeah, got out with some staggering results basically.
Yeah. And Michael, what about for you?
Well, I'm a climate scientist by training as well. I've got a background in environmental work, and I transitioned into being a full-time photographer and filmmaker just about 10 years ago. No, a bit more now. But practically all of my projects are built in relationship with researchers and nonprofit organizations that are doing this work, and because of that, I've got pretty extensive connections in that world. So my co-producer and I, who was a writer for science at the time, he now works for PBS, found this just an amazing team of researchers based in Norway and the UK, and this really fascinating research. And essentially the idea, the background of the science is, maybe it was only 10 or 15 years ago that the going thinking was during the polar night. So again, that's the time of year when the sun doesn't rise for between 4 and 6 months in the Arctic and also in Antarctica. during their winter, that during that time, it's essentially a dead zone, right? There's no light, so there's no primary productivity. You can't hunt, you can't reproduce. So essentially nothing's happening. And their research really challenged that notion. And the idea is that actually this is an environment that's incredibly sensitive to light. And so tiny amounts of light, like light from the aurora or the tiny bit of light that bounces off the upper atmosphere, that actually may be driving biological activity. So that was the research, but then they realized, wait a minute, we have so much less sea ice now than we used to have. They used to cover the Arctic Ocean during the winter. What does that mean for the amount of light that's coming in there? And this light is a millionth of what we can see. So it doesn't seem like anything, but to these organisms, it might be the equivalent of turning on a massive flashlight. So in 2018, they did this 3-week expedition to go and find out if they could detect this amount of light and detect how it's affecting the Arctic. And so that's what the film's about. And spoiler, they found more or less what they're looking for. I mean, any good science asks more questions than it answers. So there's always more work to be done, but the answer is that this is an incredibly light sensitive environment, and this is going to be an enormous change for the Arctic.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Kyle and Daniel, for you guys, the genesis of Arctic Summer.
Yeah. So like Daniel mentioned briefly, we shot this film when we were still undergrads at the University of Pennsylvania. And the idea kind of came from Daniel taking a course on Arctic politics and learning a lot about these kind of, all these plans that these countries are having to kind of get involved in this land grab situation that might be happening. And, we both kind of felt that as, Americans at an American university, we weren't really hearing about this much. And so we started researching into these specific communities, and we also had an interest in how all of this stuff was affecting indigenous communities. So we kind of cobbled together some funding from our university, bought some cameras, and that summer we went to Tuktoyaktuk, which is one of the northernmost cities in Canada. It's in the Northwest Territories, and kind of similar to Martin, we were there for a month in all daylight. So we were in June, and we took, I think we tried to take a more, or I guess rather a less scientific approach to our film, and more talking to the people who live in Tuk and how external forces and climate change and globalization is affecting their lives. And there is a lot of interesting scientific study that's going on in Tuk, but it wasn't really the focus of Arctic Summer.
Yeah, I think Kyle pretty much covered everything on how this film came about, but I think probably unlike Michael and Martin, we didn't really know what this film was going to be about going in. I think we had a plan, which was to sort of document how climate change was impacting these communities in the Arctic. But once we were there and started talking to the people, and then throughout editing, the narrative of the film changed countless times. And we landed on something that was a little bit more humanistic, as opposed to, like Kyle said, a scientific documentary on Tuktoyaktuk, more of like a portrait of what life is like in Tuktoyaktuk.
Awesome. And then Martin, I mean, obviously you said that you guys were kind of finding the narrative as you were going. I know Martin and Mike, you guys had a very, you were following a certain track. I'll start with Martin on this one. Were there unexpected production difficulties or anything that was an impediment to production that you weren't expecting?
Well, Elephant Island, as the narration says as well, is extremely inhospitable place, and so the landing sites were also largely unknown. So we headed out every day. We spent one night on the island, but for the rest during the 10 days that the researchers spent on Elephant Island, after that they went to all sorts of other islands in the same region. But we had to sort of make landfall, and sometimes we ended up on these extremely slippery, rocky parts of the island, and you'd have to sort of land, sort of beach the inflatable, and make a scrum for it and scramble across the rocks with all your gear. That was certainly not very easy, especially since the scientists were all quite light-footed. They just had a little backpack, and they were really keen to get on with the work because they had to count all these penguin colonies. So they would rush off, and I was just on my own. So then they would be sort of scattered in all these different directions. I'd be like, oh, well, wait a minute. And then the other thing was that they had what they call, which is quite funny, an harassment permit, which means that they can actually go into the penguin colonies. Now, Antarctic wildlife, for very good reasons, is very well protected. So, you know, for filmmakers, you know, we had to really stick to these rules and keep our distance, and we couldn't go into the penguin colonies. The scientists could, but that was a bit tricky also in terms of the drone shots. I wasn't allowed to operate my own drone, but the scientists had a permit to fly their drone. So I had to kind of instruct them how I wanted the drone shots done, because they just used the drones to count the penguins, not for sort of cinematic shots. But we did have a lucky break that in that 10-day time window, and there's a little cameo from my dog over there, but that during that time the weather turned really great. So we had fantastic weather, and in fact, at certain moments it was extremely warm, and even so warm that it was a bit strange that while we were there was another sort of breaking news story that the Esperanza, which was also the name of our ship, had registered a record high, and that was actually Esperanza Weather Station, which is an Argentinian weather station on the other side of the Antarctic Peninsula, and they registered something like 18 degrees centigrade. So everyone was texting me like, hey, you guys must be out there in t-shirts. That wasn't the case. But it certainly wasn't as cold as you would expect. This is also not the deep south of Antarctica. This is like by Northern Hemisphere standards, you would be sort of in southern Norway kind of thing. So it's not, you know, that far south, but yeah, we're lucky with the weather anyway.
That's good. And for you, Mike, what were some unexpected production difficulties?
Well, I would say the ones I'm going to highlight here were largely expected, but the degree to which they were difficulties was perhaps unexpected. And the first one is, and this is, I suppose, the difference from the other films here is, again, we were filming during the polar night, and we were at up to about 80 degrees north latitude in early January. So it's really dark, and you know, cameras, as I'm sure everyone knows, they paint with light. And so that technical challenge of filming in the dark was an enormous challenge. And then of course, just it's incredibly windy and stormy, and we're crunching through ice with all these audio issues, constant audio issues. It came up on the edit, especially, and then this shirt chugging, whirring, huge diesel engine at the same time. And then going inside and outside and changing temperatures, which I'm sure the other filmmakers here know wreaks havoc on lenses and batteries and magnetic interference flying the drone. So it was and this was why I wanted to do it, or one of the reasons why, because I'd done a number of adventure films before, and this seemed like it would be a real filmmaking challenge. And it certainly did live up to that. But I'll say I also think we felt very lucky. Right as we were making this film, GoPro and Sony both came on as partners on the film, and they gave us cameras to use. And they had just released these brand new sensors, which at the time were the most sensitive sensors on the market. And we felt that they did really, really well. So it was kind of cool because it was a neat parallel between what the scientists were doing, trying to build these new sensors to resolve, you know, the ability to measure these very, very low quantities of light. So it was kind of a neat back and forth there. So that's one. And the second one was I was just truly, fantastically, famously seasick for essentially, well, not the entire time, but 2/3 of the time that I was out there. We were at sea the whole time. We didn't get off the ship, and we were hit by a number of really walloping storms, about up to about 40-foot seas. So it was, and then it's not just the rise and fall; it's this
Right.
side. So I spent a number of days very, very horizontal, wishing that I was back at home. So that was a challenge. And then finally, I'll just say, you know, I think the other thing is we knew we were after this one thing to find, right? So it was both what happens if we don't get it, how do we manage that from a storytelling perspective? But also, you know, science, it doesn't happen with explosions at the end. A lot of times it happens when you're staring at a computer screen and the blip changes a little bit and you're like, oh, it worked. And so I think this idea of how do you dramatize that and make that really interesting for audiences, but at the same time be real about what science is. I mean, it happens in quiet places unceremoniously, you know. And so as a documentary filmmaker, I wanted to be true to that, but also try to find a way to make it as engaging as possible.
Awesome. And then Kyle and Daniel, same question for y'all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say part of me kind of wants to echo what Michael said about this, how the science happens, because I feel like for us, that's a lot of times how the filmmaking happens too. Is, you know, we went out and we spent 4 weeks shooting this, and you know there were some issues along the way, but for the most part, it was a really awesome time, and we were meeting, you know, the nicest, most amazing people and talking to people and hearing everybody's stories. And then we got back, and that's when the challenge kind of started for us, was how do we take these stories that we have and make something that feels, you know, honest to the people that were kind enough to let us film them, and, you know, kind of true to the experience that we had. So I almost feel like for us, I don't know, we'll see if Daniel agrees, but I would say our biggest kind of unexpected difficulty along the way was editing this, and kind of turning our 50 plus hours of footage into what is now a 24-minute short.
Yeah, absolutely. The filming was the fun part, and it was. I mean, I don't know if it was easy, but it wasn't difficult. We were just having fun. We were going around. We were filming everything we could. We were in our interviews. We were just asking every question you could think of, and we were just trying to get as much content as possible, because we knew that once we got back to the States, it was going to be quite difficult to get back up there. So we had fun while filming, and then the challenging part came when we were editing, and we had to sit there in front of 50 hours of footage and try to figure out how to cut this down into something that was watchable. Yeah, and also, Michael, I'll say I sympathize with your seasickness. I get seasick when I'm on, you know, gentle water, so I can't imagine what 40-foot waves are like.
Jake, I actually had a follow-up question for Kyle and Dan,
Go for it.
if I may ask. Yeah, I was just, first of all, congratulations on your film. I really enjoyed watching it. I was just wondering how you went about sort of gaining the trust of the community, or whether that was even necessary, that they accept you straight away. Because I understand now you did everything in one trip.
Yeah.
And I was also wondering how you settled on that community and how you went about sort of introducing yourself and getting their stories, that sort of thing. And I was also intrigued about the story of the polar bear hunter, and I was wondering what happened to him. I saw that he passed away, and you mentioned him in the credits, but it's a bit of a spoiler there. Sorry. Curious.
That's all right. In terms of gaining the trust of the community, we reached out to the mayor's office. They have a mayor in Tuktoyaktuk. We reached out to the mayor's office before we went and told them about our project and asked if they would be comfortable with us coming in and talking to the community. And someone from the mayor's office said, absolutely, we'd love to talk to you guys. Let us know when you're here. The mayor will talk to you. And then once we got to the town, in the first few days, we didn't even film anything. We would just walk around, and the town's not super used to tourists yet. That's sort of changing because they just built a road into the town, but there were just many of the people, they were interested in meeting us and were super friendly and excited to talk to us and open with us. And they would run up to us when we were walking around the town and say, what are you doing here? Where are you guys from? And they would talk to us, and we would quickly become friends with them. And then we would ask them if we could maybe sit down and interview them. And it was pretty organic in that way. And then after about a week, I'd say almost everyone in the town knew who we were. You know, these are the two Americans filming, and they're super open to talking to us. We became friends with a school teacher in the town who invited us into her classroom, which is the classroom we see in the film. We talked to her a lot. We talked to her students. So yeah, I think that they're excited to tell their story and share their situation with us.
Yeah, I almost feel like when I look back on the project, it's kind of, I would say one of my favorite parts of our own film is how comfortable I feel that the people seem on camera, and it's really not. I don't really think it's credit to Daniel and I. It's just it's kind of credit to the people in Tuck, and what they call Northern hospitality and how welcoming the community was to us. It was, you know, kind of anywhere we would go, people would invite us in and make a meal and tea and coffee and start talking. And eventually we would say, can we film this?
That's great. I mean, you guys mentioned you had 50 hours worth of footage that you had to put into a 24-minute short. And Martin, you mentioned the Shackelford stuff you wanted to include. Mike, was there anything that you, in trying to craft the narrative, that you really hated having to jettison, or anything that you wanted to include but you just didn't feel would have worked?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, you know, when we went up there, we knew this was the core story that we wanted to pursue. But because, you know, it's an expensive expedition to organize, there were several other research questions that were also being pursued at the same time, and some of them were just completely fascinating and had some really, really great footage in them, whether it was about bioluminescence or about fish that they were finding up there. And so, you know, even though we got the story that we wanted, letting go of those other side narratives, I think was a challenge for sure. And then, you know, of course, with these films, and I work principally on science films, although I do other ones as well. You know, there's only so much of a deep dive you can take into the science. You know, you got to be accurate, but you kind of take a pretty superficial level thing, so you don't overwhelm the audience with all the technical details. So, you know, there's a lot of that. You just have to weigh that up as you do it, because you don't want to minimize how you explain this either. So that was, yeah, I think that was a challenge. And then I think for me, and the thing where I feel it's the real beating heart of the film is it's a section toward the end it's maybe 5 minutes long, which is a pretty substantial section of a 28-minute film, where our main character is out on this boat in the middle of the Arctic Ocean on his own, and it's just him reflecting on what the experience is of doing research at this time in this place of the planet, which is changing faster than anywhere else on the planet and any time in human history. And for me, it's that emotional connection to the research and to the space that actually is where the film really comes together. It's what makes the science relevant, I think. But of course, in giving that much space to that, we had to, you know, fit things around to be able to fit that in, and that was an active choice, but it was a hard choice to do, to give it that much real estate in a small film.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, like balancing the humanity and the science. I mean, that's just the toughest, I think, thing with any sort of work. So I guess with Martin, I wanted to ask you too. I mean, we'll start with you, and we'll ask everybody else. Just, have you noticed any, since your time with folks in Elf Line, have you noticed any sort of changes? Have you noticed, you know, any they're being taking more notice into what's going on with the penguins down there, or any sort of, I guess, what's the long sort of track of after your production? How's it been since then?
Well, one thing that was really great with this is because the scientists pretty much had a direct result, because they do the counting, and then they compare their counts, and they had this straightforward comparison to 1970, and they saw that they had like a 50 to 60% drop in the penguin populations, which is super dramatic. And then the scientists were also willing to be very outspoken about this. There was none of this, oh, we need to analyze the data first, la la la. They were fine with making these statements. And so Greenpeace also made a point of getting that out as a global news story, and that really made international headlines, and that was great. So of course, well, when I say great, of course it's a very shocking result, but that really did boost the story, and so yeah, that was really wonderful that we had these outspoken scientists, and also that, Noah Stricker, who's a really well-known bird specialist. He also writes for National Geographic and stuff, and he really loves birds, and he brought that sort of emotional side to the film, which otherwise it could be a bit sort of dry, but he really loves birds, and that's very apparent. So that was a real gift for the film as well. And so, yeah, the story is still ongoing, but the result was pretty clear quite early on. Yeah.
Awesome. And then Mike, for you, I mean, you'd mentioned, that you're going to prove the hypothesis, but have you seen the follow through since the expedition?
Yeah, so I mean, it was pretty groundbreaking what they found. And last March, so March of 2020, a major paper in Nature Communications Biology came out, publishing this research. And at the same day, a piece in Nat Geo, and essentially that we were going to have to figure out what to do with this kind of pollution, and probably not only in the Arctic but elsewhere on the planet. That light pollution to ecosystems throughout the planet is going to be a big deal that we need to think about, but in particular in the Arctic, and in particular at winter, or during the polar night, I should say. So yeah, it's a game changer in terms of research. Since then, there's been a lot of organizations that are very interested in seeing the film, finding more, starting the conversation about what they can do about it. Again, we're sort of at a starting place. More research needs to be done. So there's been return expeditions to the Arctic planned. There's one to Antarctica planned as well, to look at the impact there. So there's a lot more work to be done. We're hoping that if everything works out, we may be able to present this at the climate conference in Glasgow this coming year, seeing what, of course, that looks like, COVID dependent. But
Right.
yeah, I think it's been a great conversation starter about this particular impact and what we need to do about it.
Awesome. And then yeah, Kyle and Daniel, I mean, what's the sort of the follow-up in with the community that you guys were documenting?
Yeah, and this kind of falls into Martin's last question that we didn't address about Jojo, the polar bear hunter. But Daniel and I's two kind of main points of contact to the community are the school teacher that we became very close to, Michelle, and the boy who's seen many times throughout the film but doesn't speak. Dallas was his name. And we've stayed in touch, and they've kind of followed along with the release of the film. As we kind of mentioned in the end notes of the film, they are starting to move homes off the shore to a neighboring, it's kind of a sub town called Reindeer Point. It's about a 10-minute drive away. And at the same time, with this road that was so kind of pretty much before 2017, the only way to get into Tuck in the winter was on an ice road, and in the summer was on a plane. And they built this road kind of in prospects of oil drilling, but then there was a 5-year oil ban by Trudeau. So now there's a road to Tuck, and the community is hoping that tourism will become a big industry there to kind of create an economy of tourism. But with COVID, it's yet to be determined. But I know the Northwest Territories have done very well in terms of COVID and kind of keeping everybody safe. So I think they're doing well on that. And yeah, we were very shocked to hear about Jojo's passing. He was someone who we, just like we said, we had just met walking around, and he had all these stories that he wanted to tell us about his hunting days and what growing up was like, which is already so different from what Tuck is like now. So that was very sad for us, and we only did learn about that relatively recently.
Yeah, I'll also mention my mute. No, I'll also mention that we've partnered with an Indigenous organization in Canada called the Legacy of Hope Foundation. So any proceeds of the film or any donations will go directly to Tuktoyaktuk and are going towards helping build a youth center in the town. Because the kids don't always have somewhere to go after school, and it's always not the best thing for them to go right home. So yeah, so you can find out more about that at legacyofhope.org. So yeah, we've been working with them, and we're also setting up screenings with them throughout Canada. Yeah. And then if I can ask Martin a quick question.
No, please do. Please do. I actually was going to see if you guys want to ask each other further questions, and it's a really good thing to do.
Yeah, well, I'm just growing up, I was a huge fan of Ernest Shackleton. So it's so cool that you were down at Elephant Island, and I was wondering if there's any sort of remnants or ruins of the Endurance ship, or if there's any.
Yeah,
Yeah.
No, well, so there's no remnants there, but we did go to the place where the campsite was, and there is a little bust there, and you would expect that to be of Shackleton, but it's not Shackleton. It's actually the captain, who I think was from Peru or no, Chile, I think he was, who actually came down to save them. But yeah, for the people who don't know, this is quite a heroic story, and I think Shackleton is now remembered as one of the great Britons, because you know, Scott is well remembered for dying in Antarctica, but he basically sacrificed all his dogs and his men. But Shackleton saved them all, and all these men came back. But he essentially left his men behind, but sailed in this little boat all the way to South Georgia, and then landed on the wrong side of the island, had to cross that island in about 48 hours. Exhausted, they came upon a whaling station, and then they found a captain who could go down to that point and save all the men. So it's an unbelievable story, but I find it even more unbelievable that these photographs have been saved, and it's a real shame that they couldn't make it into the film, because you see the men surrounded by these penguins. And I thought that was a really great image as well. They ate some of the penguins in order to survive, but yeah.
Wow.
I'm sure the Penguins would have done the same thing, where the roles reversed. Mike, do you have any questions for our Exima crew or for Martin?
Yeah, well, I was just wondering if, I think the audience might be interested in this. What was it like for y'all to be, in unbroken daylight for hours on end? What's that experience like?
It is quite grating on the mind. Yeah, I would say it was quite a shock for Daniel and I. In Tuck, everybody that lives there and that grew up in it adapts to it in a very interesting way, which they call Tuck time, which is pretty, any hour of 3 a.m., 9 a.m., all hours of the day, people are outside playing, the kids are biking around. It was kind of I would say like a sensory overload for Daniel and I, because we'd be really tired at the end of a long day. And then, we'd see out the window of the place we were staying, like, a bunch of kids going to do something, and we'd grab our cameras and go out and shoot them. And it was kind of just nonstop. But it was very fun.
Awesome. Well,
I can totally relate to that. It's like, if you're on a 6-week expedition on a ship, you do need a bit of downtime. And if there's always light, at any time of the day, you could be woken. Oh, there's a humpback whale right here, and and I like to sleep when it's really dark. So we had all these contraptions to shut out the light from our cabin and stuff, but it's a bit problematic that there's no downtime. You can shoot at any time of the day.
Situational readiness, as they say.
I have a question for Michael. I kind of felt there was an interesting parallel in your film between kind of what the ship is doing and what you're doing behind the camera, in a sense, because there's this whole issue in the middle of the film where you have to turn off all the lights on the ship, because observing the life that's going on up there with light will kind of cause it to change. And I thought that was kind of a really cool parallel to you as the filmmaker, where when you put a camera on someone or something, it inherently kind of changes. And I was wondering if you had kind of thought about that at all and in your film.
Yeah, well, so first I want to say just a quick word on that part of the story. So yeah, again, they're there studying the impacts of light, and of course, part of that is their own light that they're bringing into that environment, right? So the only way to do this research, they discover, is we have to shut off all the lights on the whole boat, on everything, and do this really totally in the dark. They are using these red headlights, essentially, that they're hoping is not going to impact the research or the organisms. So that's one thing. Already we're at 80 degrees north latitude in the darkest place on the planet, underground excluded. And now, of course, we turn off all the lights. But in addition to that, the only way to do the research is to get off of the main ship, because we can't have the equipment bashed against the side of the ship. So we go out on these tiny little dinghies, several football fields away from the main boat. So you're out on this little dinghy on this totally frozen ocean and completely black because you shut off all the lights. And we're the northernmost people on the planet at the time of filming this, probably. I mean, there's no way for us to know that for sure, but arguably. And I mean, I have to say, it was just a completely otherworldly experience. And I've got a background in adventure sports and doing other kinds of expeditions, but this is probably the closest I'll come to doing a moonwalk. I mean, it was really very wild. And to answer your question, it is something we thought about on occasion, certainly, that parallel, and that, you know, that idea of sort of interfering with space as you're filming it or as you're studying it. And I think the way that we managed that is is one trip we took, we went out in the boat, and we just very actively decided on this trip, we're not going to film. We're just going to be a participant in the space and just experience it, absent of cameras. And I think for the three of us, it was a crew of three. That experience really stood out to us. I mean, it was a time out of time kind of thing, because when you're behind a camera, you are experiencing it, but it's coming through this very intense filter, right? I mean, you're very much thinking about all the elements, and there's hundreds when it comes to filmmaking to make this work. And to stop that for a minute and just to allow yourself to, you know, experience it without thought about the film itself was really very wonderful. And it stands out to me as a very powerful memory for making this film.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we really do appreciate all of you taking the time to come speak with us and our audience about your films. Before we do go, is there any last words, any parting things you would like to leave towards everybody? And we'll start with Martin.
Well, I don't know. I mean, thanks everyone for watching and for your attention. And I mean, spread the word that the Antarctic is changing almost as fast as the Arctic, and it's a really important ecosystem that may be, you know, a little bit out of mind, but it's very important for the functioning of the whole planet. So we need to do what we can to conserve it, obviously.
And for you, Michael.
Yeah, I'll just follow on from that and saying, you know, well, first again, thanks for coming to see these films. I think it's awesome that people are getting out there and watching films like this. But of course, it's got to be more than entertainment, you know. And so hopefully it does entertain you. Hopefully you had a really great time going out and seeing these films. But when you do go home, think about what you can do to be involved with climate change. I mean, I'm of the belief, and that belief is based in science, that this is the biggest challenge that our generation faces, and we've got a certain amount of time to get this right. And so, thinking about the ways that you know, you personally interact with your decisions in your life have impacts on climate, and in a much bigger sense, what we're going to do politically. You know, and I would encourage you to get as involved as you possibly can. To get candidates in our systems that understand this issue and are very serious about tackling them, regardless of what side of the spectrum they're on, that they at least understand that this is a really big issue that we need to get very serious on now, immediately. So I really encourage you to take the next steps and get involved.
Thank you. And yeah, Kyle, Daniel, any last words on y'all's end?
I like what Michael Martin said. I think it's awesome that this festival exists and that so many people are going to be interacting with these films. I think they're right that there's more to be done beyond watching the films, and if they can think about how they can work on these issues, that would be awesome. I also realized I misspoke earlier when I mentioned the name of the website of the organization we partnered with. It's legacyofhope.ca, not .org. So yeah, that's a great place to start. Donations to Tuktoyaktuk would be awesome, but also that organization does a lot of really awesome work. So if you go to the website, you can read a lot more about that. And yeah, just awesome that people are going to be watching these films, and excited to hear what people think.
Yeah, I echo all of the above. It was an honor to talk with you guys, and really cool to see your film. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all again, and hope to, you know, see you all at the rest of the fest. And thanks again to the audience for watching. Come stick around. We have a bunch of other programs that are just as illuminating and compelling and great. So thanks again, and take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jake.
Bye.
Bye.